So I think we can go ahead and get started here. Welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ellen Gregoire. I am the department's outreach outreach and communications manager. And I run our mentorship program along with many other outreach events throughout the department. So thank you for joining so much today. Welcome to all of the students here and welcome to our panelists. So this is presented by the Department of Economics Mentorship Program. Just a quick note for those of you who aren't in the mentorship program, if you would like to be, we accept applications in the fall. So we can go ahead and accept your application in the fall. Seniors, I'm so sorry if you're haven't gotten a chance to join the program. I also wanted to take a quick note before we get started, just to acknowledge a great loss in our department. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but over the weekend, we lost one of our faculty members, Greg Ellis, and we're not entirely sure what has happened, but at this point, we will be getting more information to his students because he was teaching, and we'll be sharing ways to pass along your messages because I know he was very beloved by his students, to his family. So please look for more information on that. And also please remember that the university offers CareLink and other opportunities for students who are experiencing grief, and for all faculty and for staff as well. So if you need any of those, please reach out to those resources and I can help you with those. So you're free to contact me as well about those. So moving on past that a little bit. Welcome to our panelists. Thank you so much. And thank you to our panelists who have been able to take the time to join us this evening. All three of our panelists are undergraduate alumni of our department and then also went on to receive graduate degrees. And coincidentally, all three of them received graduate degrees from the University of Washington. So we are double Huskies in this room. So our first panelist is Jeff Rowe. He received his BA from our department and then went on to earn his, his MBA from the Foster School of Business. Jeff is now the president and CEO of Premera Blue Cross, a prominent health insurance agency in the area. I'm sure many of you know it. Next, we have Bill Severson. After receiving his bachelor's degree from our department, Bill went on to law school at the university and received his Juris Doctorate. He is now the owner of Severson Law, PLLC, providing legal representation in matters involving state and local taxation and other government fees and exactions. And our third panelist is Christina Tapia. As many of you may have seen her from last week's Women in Economics panel. She is an alumna of our department twice over, having graduated with her bachelor's in our department and then having gotten her PhD in our department as well. And she now holds multiple roles and titles. She is an economist for Northwest Economics LLC. She's a visiting lecturer in our department and an adjunct economics professor for Seattle University's Elbers School of Business and Economics. So thank you and welcome to our panelists. Students, I know that I've said this a few times, but if you have any questions throughout the panel at any point, please go ahead and put those in the chat and those will be collected and passed along to me. So with that, I'm just gonna let the three of you introduce yourselves. So Jeff, if you'd like to go first.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeff Rowe. As Ellen said, I'm a graduate in 1988 with degrees in political science and economics from the UW. Then went on and got my MBA. We'll talk about my decision to go to graduate school and the value that I've gotten both from that as well as the undergraduate degrees that I received. I started my career in Washington, D.C. I worked on Capitol Hill for a U.S. Senator from Washington State for 5 years and then returned to the Northwest. Seattle's my home. This is where I was born and bred. I worked in a consulting firm for a few years. After returning from DC, fully expected I would go back to DC at some point in my career and opted instead to stay here in the Northwest and to stay in the private sector. That's also something we can talk about later as we progress. Joined Premera in 1996 and was there for 9 years, left, went to Safeco. There was a tower in the U District called the Safeco Tower. It's now owned by the UW, but it's the tallest building in the U District. I worked in that building for a short time as co-president of Safeco, and then returned to Premera. shortly after that stint there, and have been there ever since. I've been CEO for 6.5 years, and have the great privilege of working for a great organization, and we believe doing good things for people at times when they're most vulnerable healthcare. I have 2 husky daughters. One was a finance major, and the other was a communications major. They're 25 and 23. And I have a Coug in my family now. She's a freshman at Wazoo. Opted to go a different route. She didn't want to follow her sisters to the UW. So good for her. And my wife and I have lived here in Seattle for 28 years since I came back from DC. So that's a little about me. It's really a great honor to be with you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Bill?
Bill Severson. It's interesting, Jeff's startup history is pretty similar to mine. I went through, got my econ degree at the UW, and then went on to law school at the UW. After I got out of that, I initially thought I'd get a postgraduate degree in applied and was accepted at the Sloan School at MIT and went back there to start that program. Decided after about a week of heavy contemplation that wasn't such a good idea, so canceled out of that, went down to DC and started work there for the Federal Energy Administration. After about a year in DC, I realized I wanted to live in the Northwest, and so started interviewing back in Seattle that summer. Got what I thought was a plum, and turned out to be a plum job with the King County Prosecutor's Office with Chris Bailey, who is a young up-and-coming reform-minded prosecutor. And I spent 8 years there doing county tax and finance work. I took a couple of years off to do other things after that, and then went into private practice. Worked for 2 large Seattle law firms over a course of 15 years, and then went off on my own in 2016. All of the work involving state and local taxation, public finance, fees and charges, and that kind of work. And that's what I've been doing ever since. Love the Northwest. I'm really glad I got back here and was able to find a job that was fulfilling and kept me there.
Thanks so much, Bill. Christina?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Christina Tapia, and first let me just say that it is truly an honor to be on a panel with Bill and Jeff. In addition to being extremely smart people, I know they're also just great people, and so it's an honor to be on a panel with both of you. And I also wanted to thank Ellen for I was flattered to be invited, and for all of Ellen's work in planning a panel like this. I know if I were a student, I'd really appreciate this kind of event. So let's see where to start. I've pretty much grown up in the Seattle area and in the Pacific Northwest. My parents did immigrate from Greece, and so but soon after arriving, they moved to Seattle, and so I've pretty much grown up here. I have completed my college education at the University of Washington and loved every minute of it. As Ellen mentioned, I completed my bachelor's degree in economics and history. I then went on actually just across the quad a little bit, and I obtained a master's in education and taught for several years. As maybe we can get into a little bit later, in addition to loving economics, I also loved teaching and continue to that's one of my 2 loves, economics and teaching. And so I went and got a master's in education and taught for several years, and then found that I wanted to kind of immerse myself more in economics, and that kind of led to my return to campus to obtain a master's and then a PhD in economics. In terms of my work has included a combination of teaching and working, I'd say, more in a consulting capacity, using my background in economics. I have enjoyed having that combination, and I think that they complement each other quite well. In terms of places that I've worked with consulting firms probably for most of my career, as well as with an accounting firm, one of the big four accounting firms, applying my background in economics, and found that personally I liked the problems and the issues that I worked with in a consulting setting more. I enjoyed those kind of puzzles and working on those sorts of analyses. And so after working for an accounting firm and a few consulting firms, I eventually started Northwest Economics in 2016 and have continued my work there, as well as my teaching as a visiting lecturer and as an adjunct. And I think I've covered everything in terms of, yeah, I think that covers everything. Maybe we'll get into some other details in the context of the other questions.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'm just gonna jump right into these questions. I see we have a couple already from students, but I'm gonna start with one that I sent you guys already. So what led you three to pursue a graduate degree after completing your economics BA? And how did you choose what to study or what degree to study? So whoever would like to start, go ahead.
Well, I'll go first. That's an easy one for me. I'll leave the harder questions to Christina and Bill. They can go first on those. So my decision to go to graduate school was the first step in a really conscious pivot in my career from the public sector and public policy into the private sector. As I mentioned, I'd spent 5 years on Capitol Hill. I came back and I worked in a consulting capacity, and I really found the private sector more to my liking than I did the public sector, just kind of aligned more philosophically with who I am. Very results-oriented person, and I found the private sector to be more kind of bottom line oriented than I did the public sector. So my decision to go to graduate school was a first step in that process. While I had an economics background and a political science degree to go with that, I felt like I needed more grounding in just the basics of business and the fundamentals of business. So an MBA was logical in that respect. The second step I took didn't involve graduate school, but was an important one in pursuit of a career in business. And that was joining an organization that was large enough to allow me to move from what I would deem to be more of a staff function. I was in kind of public affairs, communications, those sorts of things, into more line management for a line of business. And Premera, which is about a $12 billion company today, serving 2.5 million people, afforded me that opportunity, and joined Premera, and then within about 3 years was made the head of marketing, and then kind of progressed from there. But getting an MBA was really an important step in that regard, because I don't think I would have been considered for those other roles absent the training that I got in business school.
Okay, well, I guess I'll go second. I ended up going to law school after econ because I was always interested in politics and public policy kinds of issues. I started off my undergraduate career thinking I would be a political science major, but I just found the coursework in political science not very useful in terms of coming up with sort of analytic frameworks for understanding the world. And I found economics, or discovered economics, looking around to try and find a better fit, and was captured by economics because it provides a much more logical framework for analyzing issues, and I found that really attractive. But I never lost my interest in politics or public policy, and when I got up and done with my econ undergrad, going to law school was something that had been on my mind sort of all along. Also, when I came out of undergraduate school, it was 1971, and that was the year of the Boeing bust, if any of you have ever heard of that. But times were pretty tough back then as well. So it was a good time to go to graduate school rather than trying to find a job. So that was how I kind of got into law school, and I, the economic background, and we'll probably get into this more. I've used very much in my legal practice, and I think that's true for lawyers generally. A sound economic background is really a valuable tool for people who want to go into law, regardless of what sort of law you might be interested in. I hope that takes care of the question. Christina?
Yes. Well, so throughout kind of my the development of my education and career, in choosing what to study and whether to go to graduate school, the way that I always thought about it is, what knowledge, skills, and experience do I need to do the kind of work that I want to do? And, if you think about it, if you were starting a building project, you would probably do a lot of research. You would maybe outline some plans. You would talk to a lot of people. You'd find out, based on all of that, what tools you need, what supplies you need, what equipment you need. And so the way I think about it is, with your education, you're asking yourself, what do I need to build the career that I want? What skills and education do I need? And when I was initially finishing up my bachelor's degree in economics, I was fortunate enough to have, many great professors, but one that really inspired my love of economics was Professor Paul Hayne. And not only was he just an outstanding teacher, but he really helped to develop my love of economics. And I was able to work with him with the Foundation for Teaching Economics, and that kind of inspired my love of going into teaching. And so at that time, as mentioned earlier, I initially thought, okay, I want to go and teach, and I got a master's in education. And after doing that, I realized I needed some additional education because I wanted to immerse myself more in economics. And I found that I needed, that kind of inspired my return to the UW campus to get first a master's in economics. And then I worked for several years with a master's in economics to see what sort of work was I able to do, what kind of problems can I work on. And I really enjoyed applying economics in that work, but it was through that process that I learned more, and I was exposed to more to be able to see that I needed to add more to my toolbox in order to do the kind of work that I wanted to do. And so it's after that experience that I decided, okay, I need to return to graduate school and get a PhD in economics because I needed to add some additional tools to my toolbox to be able to do the kinds of projects and the kind of work that I wanted to do. So it was, for me, it was a process of exploring, seeing what I could do with the tools and the equipment and the knowledge that I had, and then returning to graduate school as I learned that I needed to kind of further my education in order to get into the projects and the jobs that I wanted.
Thank you. I love that idea of wanting to put another item in your toolbox. So can you please compare your experiences of the study of economics and economics in general in academia versus industry? And I guess this is for all three of you, but Christina in particular, having been through all of the sides of academia, economics.
Okay, so I'll start. So compare, say that one more time. Yeah. Just
compare and contrast your experience studying economics versus working in economics.
Okay, interesting. That's a very interesting question because in some ways, maybe I hadn't thought about this, but one way that that they're really not in my mind, they're not different, is that I feel like there's an educational element in both realms. So in I hate to use the phrase real world, but in kind of industry or in applying economics to real world problems, there's still this element of kind of going back to the principles and being able to apply the principles of economics and be able to explain and communicate those principles in the same way that it would occur in a classroom. I mean, we're always kind of going back to those principles, and then being able to communicate that, even if it's not in a classroom setting, but in private industry where you're talking with people who aren't students, but being able to communicate clearly and being able to articulate some of these principles is incredibly important. And so in that respect, I feel like the skills from kind of the classroom to kind of the corporate setting, I suppose those skills kind of cross over, and I feel like it's, in both worlds, that's important. In some ways, the difference is, I guess the biggest difference between sort of a classroom academic setting and real world issues and problems in a private industry application is that in the real world, the problems that you deal with aren't neat and clean. Sometimes when you have kind of problem sets to work on, there's a nice solution and it works out neatly. And I really enjoy working on real world problems because not only are they real and impacting real people, but there's sort of a messiness to it that is an extra challenge. And that's when your background in economics really comes in handy and is valuable, because that's when you have to go back to the frameworks and the basic principles and really figure out how to approach a problem when it doesn't have a neat answer to it.
Bill, you want to go?
Okay, yeah, sure. So for me, the way I would look at that would be that the classroom experience was learning the principles of economics. And then in my practice, my use of economics is really applying the principles that I've learned. And as much like Christina said, in the real world, the facts and the reality are much more complex than the sort of stylized, clean models you get in the classroom context. So you have to do a lot of careful thinking about, how you can best utilize the principles and what modifications to the factual complexity bring to how you analyze things. So it's in one cases you're learning the tools, you're developing the tools that you can use, and then when you're using those tools in law or probably anything else, you're applying those tools. And some of it you're going back and refreshing yourself all the time, or at least I am, on your understanding of the tools and trying to update yourself to make sure you're current in your understanding. But it's the application of the tools to real world problems, and I find that puzzle and doing that in the legal context to be really interesting and rewarding. Jeff?
Sure. Ellen, thanks. Bill, thank you. So the way that my undergrad translated for me is that I find economics to be about perspective and about critical thinking. And it's really about organizing kind of disparate parts on a macro basis or even a micro level into a cohesive framework that helps you understand interdependencies, cause and effect, outcomes, so forth. And really, that's what insurance and healthcare is about. We're trying to forecast the future. And so we're trying to incorporate all sorts of variables into some logical framework. So understanding models, inputs, variables, scenarios, the like, is really important to us. And I think fundamentally the grounding I got as an econ major and the training that I got there was really formative for me, because it helped me think about how all those things can come together. And that's just so critical to business in general, but in particular, it's important in the business I'm in. The other thing I would say is that economics is viewed as a very serious degree. There are some that are more serious than others, and economics is certainly in the latter category. It's very credible in the marketplace, and I always felt like it just kind of gave me a bit of a certification sorts, that it was legit. What I studied was important and meaningful and material to whatever job I had.
Thank you. So the next question we have is, if you are unsure about whether or not you want to study any sort of graduate degree, would you three recommend working in industry or taking a gap year, or what type of thing to discover, what type of career you want to have from there?
Well, I'll take a first stab at that. I think gap years, generally for going into law particularly, can be really valuable. I didn't do that, so I'm not speaking from experience, but if going straight through into law school, I think is a challenge, because much of law school requires an understanding of kind of the ways in which the world operates, and for me, and I think for a lot of undergraduates, there's relatively little experience with that if you go straight through school. All my classmates in law school who had been out for a few years and came back to law school, I always felt that they had a lot better grounding in sort of the nature of the problems that you are presented with in law school to solve. Law school is taught on a case method, much like business school is, and the cases and real world scenarios that you're presented make a lot more sense to people who've had some real world experience, kind of regardless of what that is. I had part-time jobs and did work, so it wasn't that I was unfamiliar with that, but I wasn't ever kind of in responsible positions really with jobs before I went to law school. And I think in retrospect, that would have been valuable. There's of course a trade-off, you're giving up a few years of doing that compared to the years you would have when you get out of law school. But I think certainly if you've got any doubts about what you're doing, or if you're not, really targeted, I think gap years can be very valuable. Not required by any means. If you want to go straight through, that's certainly possible. But I think there's a lot of value to going off and working.
I'll go ahead and go next. So I, as I described, I did take, I did kind of take some time between degrees to really have a clear sense of what is it that I want to do, or why do I need this additional education? As I mentioned, like this additional tool in my toolbox, this additional training. What am I going to use it for? And so I found it helpful to be out in the working world and explore a bit. And I think that helped me to really focus in on how and why I want to get this additional education. If someone is considering graduate school in economics, for example, I think it does help. Some people may have a very clear vision of what it is that they would want to have as the subject of their dissertation, for example, or what exactly they want to focus on with their PhD. But if you're still in the position where you're exploring and trying to figure that out, I do think that there's a lot of value to taking some time and maybe working and applying the education you have, just to allow yourself to be exposed to more fields, more topics, more subjects. And then when you return to graduate school, you'll have a better sense of what your interests are, because you invest a lot of time in the research that you do to develop your dissertation. And then you have this dissertation that could be a great thing to be a jumping off point for the rest of your career. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to really think about where you want to focus your time and effort and research for that dissertation. And to the degree that stepping away and working for some time and exploring for some time, if that helps you to make a better decision, both for your research and maybe even the school that you want to apply to, I think that that can yield a lot of benefits for the rest of your career to make a better decision about that.
I think that's great advice from both Bill and Christina. So I have three thoughts for you. The first is there's no wrong answer here. There's only more informed and therefore perhaps a better answer for you. The second thing I would say about graduate school is it's never too late to go. I started my MBA when I was 30. So, I was 7 years into my career, 7.5 years into my career, and I went to graduate school. Now, I continued working through graduate school, so I didn't, sideline my career to pursue that. Though I think it would have worked out fine had I done that too, but it allowed me to move my career forward too while I moved my academic career forward. The third thing I would say, and this goes to advice that I think is pretty consistent with what Bill and Christina have said, is that I would recommend not going until you have a better sense of what you want to do. And I can speak from experience how that changed my own direction. I finished college, went to work on Capitol Hill, and there you're making law. And naturally, the background or training that most people have is in the legal profession and at law school. So I had every expectation of going to law school while I was on Capitol Hill. And then I left Capitol Hill and went to work in the private sector, and my interests changed and my ambitions changed, and therefore my educational route changed too. And I moved from wanting to go to law school to wanting to go to business school. And that was a really good decision for me, and not the one I would have made if I'd have done it right after college, undergraduate, or even in the first year or two of my career. I would have pursued something different. And the last thing I would say is, by taking at least a gap year, if not gap years, you will enrich your own learning experience. As Bill and Christina said, you are able to participate more effectively when you have some practical experience, when you have a better understanding of the whole of the picture and not just what you've read, but instead what you've experienced. And I'm a very experiential learner too, so I don't sit there and read and then assume that I know or can do. And so by being able to participate more effectively in the classroom setting, it made my learning that much more effective. The other thing for me is, because I was doing my MBA and my career in parallel, I could start to apply the things I was learning in real time. And that practical experience was really, really useful.
Thank you so much. So Paul, you already Jeff, you already started with this. What advice would you guys have for these students or for anyone considering graduate school?
Well, you heard mine, so I'll defer to Bill and Christina.
Christina, you want to take that?
Sure. Well, I would say, and I touched a little bit on this, but I would say to, thinking about graduate school in economics, I think that it's valuable to expose yourself to a lot of different kind of fields, and go and watch presentations, even if you don't think that you're interested in a topic. I think it's important to expose yourself to a lot of different fields and applications so that you can, for kind of having a well-rounded education, but also so that you can make a smarter decision about the focus that you want to have. So I think that helps a lot. And so if you see a presentation going on, go watch that, talk to people, and really try and make an informed decision about kind of what graduate school you want to go to, what focus you want to have. I would say that kind of on a more practical level, when if you've decided to go to graduate school, really think about which schools you apply to. Once you have figured out your focus and what specialty you want to have or where you want to devote your research, it's valuable if you kind of do some research into the different departments, the faculty that will be there, so that whatever your specialty is, that you'll have a good support, a strong dissertation committee, and have faculty that have a great background in the field that you want to study. That will end up being a big help to you as you get into writing your dissertation. So that's something to think about. And again, for that reason, it helps if you have made some progress on figuring out how exactly you want to focus your graduate studies.
Well, I agree with everything Jeff and Christina said. That's really great advice. Sort of reiterating some of that, I think it's really worth thinking about it and talking about it. Talk to your friends, explore the ideas of what you want to do with your life and why you want to go to graduate school and what the options are. For those of you who already have that path strongly in mind, and you're already charging down a path and you're comfortable with it, then do what Christina said. Look for the schools that are going to really give you the best background for what you're already focused on doing. But if you don't have that level of focus, then take advantage of all the resources you can to try and narrow in on what you think you want to do. Go to the Career Center and do some research there on things. Take some of the self-examination tests to figure out what you're interested in and what you're good at, and talk to people and really explore it. Reach out to people in the community if you have interests. Go talk to some lawyers if you're thinking about going to law school, but you're not sure. All of those sorts of efforts will help you sort of get a better, stronger sense of what you want to do with your life. I suppose beyond that, the other thing I would say is be open to changing your mind. Just like Jeff said, what you think is a good idea now, that may change. And while it's very useful to have good plans and to have some targets of where you want to go, you'll want to keep open to the possibility of changing direction when that appears valuable. So you sort of want to try and do both at the same time, and not go crazy being sort of have two different minds.
Could I just I just wanted to add, I like that answer so much, Bill, that I just wanted to reiterate that I think that's a really important point. And not to feel like the decision that you make kind of sets the course of your life, that you can't alter. I mean, the nature of the career path and your life in general is that, we make the best decisions that we can with the information that we have at each step in the way and along the way. And so, but as your career develops, and Jeff mentioned this too. I mean, it's never too late to go to graduate school to add to your education. And so as your career develops, don't ever feel like that door is shut. You will always be able to re-enter and add to your education skills and kind of take a different direction. So it's never a one-time only decision. So maybe that takes a little pressure off.
Sorry, couldn't unmute there for a second. Thank you so much. It's so funny. Having gone to graduate school myself, it's really amazing how much everything you guys said rings true. So what are some common misconceptions you guys have, that people have, I'm sorry, for your industry specifically?
Well, Christina, go ahead. Were you gonna go?
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm in healthcare and I'm on the payer side. And there's a hierarchy in healthcare where providers are sort of on this pedestal, and then insurers, though I think we're much more than that as a company, are sort of on a different level. And it doesn't bother me, though I think the pedestal might be a little misplaced, or at least higher than it should be. But one, I think, myth about insurers is that they're self-interested and they're trying to stand in the way of people getting care. And maybe for financial reasons in particular, more financially oriented. That's certainly not true of Premera, company I am with. We're a not-for-profit, first of all, though we operate in a private market and have to compete and have sufficient scale to do so. But I don't think it's true of most payers either. We're here to help people in a time of need, and a time when many are at their most vulnerable, when they're ill and in need of care. So we're trying to enable that and enable it to happen in a way that's most effective for our member, the patient, not for the system, and certainly not for ourselves. And we attract a lot of talent to our organization because of that mission-driven mindset. You know, there are a lot of ways to be in business, but the best that I can think of is one that actually contributes back to society in really meaningful ways. It's not about a widget, but it's about people's lives, in our case. The other misconception I would say about almost every industry, but certainly insurance, is that it's boring. It is far from boring. I love numbers. My dad was a math major. We've got, you know, massive capital. There's so much money pouring into healthcare in the way of innovation, investments. We have on our board a guy who runs Venrock private equity, venture capital, actually, in Palo Alto. There's just huge opportunity for improvement. So it's a very dynamic space, and I find that pretty exciting. So the misconception is that it's not, and it is. It's great. It's really exciting. So.
I'll go ahead and I'll go next. Well, I guess what I was thinking is that working as an economist, I love working on analytical, quantitative problems. And I think maybe one misconception, or at least an incomplete perception of economists, is that that it's all about the numbers. I think one of the things that I love about economics, and that's the beauty of economics, is that it combines quantitative with social sciences, with psychology. There's so much kind of wrapped into economics that gives it an advantage when approaching a problem and analyzing a problem. And I think in terms of this misconception or incomplete perception, I think that sometimes economists are viewed as just the numbers people. And one thing that I think is important for students to know is how important the communication is, and how important it is to be able to articulate, either in writing or in, you know, in kind of a presentation, the story behind the numbers, the explanation behind the analysis. And in many ways, the verbal skills and the communication is critical, because often you'll find yourself presenting the quantitative analysis that you might know inside and out to individuals who don't have a background in economics, who are very smart, but just don't, their background is in a different subject. And so it's critical to be able to communicate that, communicate what you know about the numbers, what you know about the analysis and the conclusions. It's critical to be able to communicate that. And so I think that one of the things that I want to make sure students take away is that don't underestimate the value of being able to develop your communication skills in the context of economic analysis. That's a very important part, and really will help you in your career, because you need to be able to communicate what you know and what you've discovered analytically to others who maybe don't have a background in economics.
Well, I would say that in law, there's, I guess, maybe I'd like to say three things about that. First is, I think there's misunderstandings or distorted views, kind of at opposite ends of the law profession, in the sense that I think some people, would view lawyers very skeptically and cynically because they're all sharks, and there's sort of that image of lawyers. That's, yes, there are sharks in the legal profession, but they're few and far between. It's by and large a profession that is distinguished by having people who are bound by principles of honor and truth and fair dealing, and that's just a core part of the practice of law in most cases. At the other end, there's people who are sort of overly deferential to lawyers. They think lawyers are kind of like little gods, and if the lawyer says it must be right, and that's not always true either. They're not. They're just people, and they shouldn't be overly deferential. The third thing I'd say is, being a lawyer is nothing like being a lawyer on television or in the movies. It's just not at all like that. That's all drama. In the real world, most lawyers deal with economic problems and legal problems, and it's really useful to have an understanding of economic frameworks for analyzing problems, and then the law provides you with the legal framework, and you're problem solving within that framework as a lawyer, and that's what lawyers do. And it requires a lot of hard work, a lot of work by yourself in the office, drafting and thinking about things, and that's mostly what lawyers do. And that's, to whatever extent you think lawyers are running around on the streets and going into court and just coming up with these wonderful arguments on the spur of the moment, that's not the practice of law, mostly.
You're still muted.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. So we're coming close to the end of our time here, so this may have to be our last question. Can you each tell us a little bit about a day in your life, your work week, and also a little bit about how that's changed because of COVID and the pandemic and all of that?
Christina, go.
All right. Well, just briefly, frankly, some aspects have not changed that much. I feel fortunate to be able to continue to do the work that I do. I mean, as long as I have my computer, and thank goodness for technology that we can still continue making progress. So I would say that post-COVID, some of my work hasn't changed very, very much. There's still kind of analysis that I can do on my computer. I can prepare reports and and email. And so all of those things haven't changed that much. Teaching, of course, as I don't need to tell the students, transitioning everything to Zoom, of course, that's been a change. I think that while it's not ideal, and I don't think that anyone would prefer the Zoom format, I do think that I could say that I'm thankful that we at least have the opportunity to continue to have classes, meetings, and so forth via Zoom. So I'm thankful that this is occurring at a time in our history when we at least have the technology to be able to continue making progress. You know, some of the ways that it's changed is that obviously, you know, there are some aspects of face-to-face meetings that we can no longer do. And so that has been sort of a challenge that we've worked around. And again, with the use of technology, we've been able to work around it. But really, I wouldn't say that other than everything transitioning to Zoom, many of the aspects of my work has stayed the same. I can still keep making progress. And for me, it'll be very interesting to see what the world is like once we start to go back, and how many of these elements you know, we continue to have online versus going back to face-to-face. So in some ways, it's reduced transaction costs of traveling and things like that. But of course, we miss the face-to-face opportunity to meet and interact with people. So.
Okay. Well, Jeff, I'll give you the last word. My experience has been very similar to Christina's. The nature of the work has not been changed very much by COVID. You know, I've got my computer, so the analysis, the telephone is there, the Zoom meetings are there, so I can deal with clients much the same way as I did before. The work doesn't change. The research resources in law now are mostly all online anyway. So I haven't for years have not been going to the physical law books to do research. It's all been online. So none of that has changed very much. I do dearly miss the opportunities to have personal interaction with clients and colleagues that I had before. So that's sort of a personal loss, but in a professional sense, it hasn't changed very much. Probably the biggest sort of change that has occurred is the operation of courts, the court system and the administrative law system, where it's been slow to sort of figure out exactly how you're going to adapt the rules of evidence, for example, or cross-examination of witnesses to a Zoom context. And it's limited in the situations where that really works. So those processes have been somewhat disrupted, I think. The ordinary day of a lawyer varies on the kind of law you do as a matter of practice. Some lawyers spend their whole day on the telephone. They always have, and they always will. And that was the way it was before COVID, and it'll be the way it is after COVID. Others do a lot more sort of analytic work, where they're thinking about things, writing, studying more of the practice. For the courtroom lawyers, there's been a big impact on their practice by COVID. That'll go back to normal, I'm sure, and that's probably the area of law that's been most strongly affected. And those people have an intense that the nature of that kind of practice is this intense, you know, very focused, trial-oriented practice, which most lawyers don't do that. I've been able to do a reasonable amount of trial practice work, but I don't enjoy doing it all the time. There are some who do, but they've got a different personality than I have. Jeff?
All right, I'll bring us home here real quickly. I was in a lot of meetings before the pandemic, and I'm in a lot of meetings now after the pandemic. It's just they're all virtual and digital these days. So in some respects, my day hasn't changed much. As CEO, though, there's something I'm much more conscious of now than I was before, and that's culture. I think culture for an organization is the secret sauce. Most companies in an industry have similar strategies. They might have similar products, but plans. But what sets them apart is their culture. You look at Microsoft as an example. It was a company that for 12, 13 years under a certain CEO didn't move very much. And in the last 7 under Satya Nadella, it's just been like a rocket ship. And Satya introduced a different culture there, and it really changed the company. So as CEO, I'm very conscious of culture always, but even more so now, because I used to walk around our campus, say to get my lunch or go to a meeting, and I would see people. And we have a little more than 3,000 employees. And so you'd get a taste of the culture, and you could have your pulse on things, and you just make connections with people, and that brings them in. So it's more inclusive, they're more engaged, and you get intelligence from people about what's going on, what's working, what's not. And I don't get that now. And so I worry a great deal about our culture, and whether people are engaged, whether we're aligned around our plan. Because we can all nod and then we drift and we kind of go our separate ways on things. And that undermines or at least compromises our strategy. And you can't allow that. So I focus a lot on preserving that culture.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists here and to all of you students who are able to join us. I know we don't really have too much time here for another question, but hopefully panelists would be open to answering questions if you guys had wanted to send those along to me via email. And also I wanted to let you guys all know that we are going to be having another career panel in a few weeks. It's going to be mid-April after spring break, and that panel is going to be focused on careers in the tech industry, focusing on economics. So if anyone had, any last thoughts, we have 1 minute here. If anyone wants to jump in. If not, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and hope to see you guys again soon, eventually in person. But for now, happy that we're able to take this time here. Oh, it looks like someone does have a question. You can just go ahead and jump in.
So if you had a transitional period between your undergrad and postgrad, I know Jeff does or did. I'm just wondering, what type of work were you doing, and how far away was it from the type of path that you were considering at that time?
Well, for me, it wasn't that far afield because I came out of college wanting to be in politics and government, and I went right into that. It was by being in that game that I was exposed to more than just that field or that work. And that's what allowed me to kind of move in a new direction. But I think it is important that you pursue something that's of interest to you. You don't want to just wander. You want to have intent, and you should have a goal, and you should be working towards that goal. I think you can make it a little more circuitous than some think by taking those extra years to gain some experience and some perspective on your career and your interests, because they may change, as I said, and that's the value. But I wouldn't say, if you're an econ major, that you go do something entirely different just so that you can see that side of the world. I think you should stay relatively within your lane, but push the boundaries a little bit on that. And you may find that there aren't boundaries for you at all, or that those are absolutely right for you and you should continue down that track.
Thank you.
Could I just briefly mention something on that topic?
Of course.
Just the thing that I ended up doing some work that eventually kind of led me to continue along that same path. And the biggest value that I got out of that work is just really being, rolling up my sleeves and getting my hands into some projects and seeing, oh yeah, that's I want to do more of this. And then I can also see kind of later down the road some more complex projects. And so it really gave me sort of a seat at the table. It allowed me to have a kind of a front row seat to see that sort of work up close.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everyone. Well, we are at time here, so I'm gonna respect our panelists' time here and say thank you so much for joining us here this evening, and hope to see you guys again soon. Thank you so much to our panelists. It was so great to hear from you this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. Thanks, Ellen.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Luck.